Thank you all for joining us today. Um, we will get started with our discussion. I want to just say a few housekeeping things before I turn it over to Richard Fulton of AJLJ to start today's conversation. Um, um, very much housekeeping. I'm Vicki Fishman from the Jewish Community Relations Council. And today we will be recording today's program. And if you would like to turn on captions, that has been enabled. So you can go ahead and do that. There's also Q&A at the bottom. If you have questions, you can use that part of the Zoom program. And then I want to just acknowledge what's happening in Israel today. I think we all come to today's conversation with a heavy heart. And as we hold our loved ones who we haven't met, but I think we still feel our loved ones in our hearts, there is a Jewish tradition of dedicating learning to somebody's memory or in somebody's honor. And I'd like us to do that today and dedicate today's conversation to the memory of Ofed Lifshitz, whose remains have been identified, and to Shiri Kfir and Ariel Bibas, who we do not yet know if that is who has been returned, but that's who Hamas has told us has been returned to Israel. With that, I will go ahead and turn the program over to Richard.
Thank you, Vicki. I'll first mention first of all, I want to share in the thoughts we've just heard from Vicki. It is a somber day in Israel, but also in the Jewish community globally, and I think for all people of goodwill, it should be a very somber and sad day. This is, of course, a virtual version of the brown bag lunch that has been taking place for many years now under the auspices of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington, American Jewish Committee, the AAJLJ, American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, of which I am executive director, and I am sure Tzedek DC. If there are any sponsoring organizations that I have left out inadvertently, please forgive me. The AAJLJ is, as I was just telling Asaf offline a moment ago, will be undertaking a mission to Israel in the next week or two. And it's obviously been a somber and difficult time in Israel for a good while now, but now especially. We're going to be, I think, treading carefully and mindful of what everyone in Israel is going through. But the sense of grief and isolation that comes with these events is very much, I think, part of a larger picture of how Israel has been isolated and treated in the international community and in academia generally. And to deal with to help us understand some of those issues, we really have a terrific a speaker and interlocutor, because I hope it's going to be a conversation and folks who have questions will be able to ask those questions through the miracles of chat and Q&A. But so let me introduce Professor Asaf Romirowsky Dr. Romirowsky without further ado. He's the Executive Director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East, SPME. He's a fellow at the Middle East Forum and a professor at the University of Haifa. Trained as a Middle East historian, he holds a PhD in Middle East and Mediterranean Studies from King's College London in the UK, and is published widely on various aspects of the Arab-Israeli conflict and American foreign policy in the Middle East, as well as on Israeli and Zionist history. Asaf is co-author of Religion, Politics, and the Origins of Palestine Refugee Relief, and a contributor to the Case Against Academic Boycotts of Israel, an important early book in the intellectual response to BDS. His publicly engaged scholarship has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, the National Interest, the American Interest, the New Republic, the Times of Israel. I won't go on, but too many media outlets to to list. Today, we're going to hear about the issue of freedom of speech, academic freedom, and protecting Jewish students, how to protect all three at the same time. It often seems, and I'll just kick it off with this, it often seems to me that you hear a lot of concern about academic freedom and free speech coming from folks who have absolutely no regard or concern for the academic freedom and freedom of speech of Jewish students or faculty who are supportive of the state of Israel. And on the other hand, I think we, as civil libertarians, don't want to take second place to anyone in our concern for protecting academic freedom and freedom of speech. So how do we square that circle, Dr. Romirowsky? And perhaps you can help with us that and tell us what else you think we need to know about these very complex and important issues. Please take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard, for the introduction. Thank you, Vicky and JCRC and all the groups that helped sponsor today's luncheon, Lunch and Learn. It's a pleasure to be here. So as Richard said, so let me just contextualize some of my background. I am a Middle East historian by training. I am not a lawyer, so for all those lawyers in the room, I just put that out there as well. But let me try to. I have been in this space studying and challenging the issues as regarding anti-Semitism and in general the larger space that we're facing led to what I would consider to be the larger kind of explosion of anti-Semitism post 10/7 on American college campuses. And we could take it from there, and we could kind of dive into all of this. It was one of the late commentaries and one of the more important Middle East historians of this that existed in this generation, the late Bernard Lewis, and the other association that I had, the Association of Middle East Studies in Africa, that he was one of the founders of that association. Correctly described what, when it came to the debate about the war on Zionism or the debate about Zionism and anti-Semitism. He described it as qualities of what he considered to be cosmic evil. And Lewis also was very careful about, talking about the fact that anti-Semitism survived the Holocaust, obviously, and then emerging and reemerging as this obsessive hatred towards Israel, which many in this larger space define as the new anti-Semitism. There's a lot of great debate about new and old. Is this actually new? Is it actually old? I don't disagree with Lewis's assessment. I think that from an historical standpoint, one could argue that pre-1948, it was probably the only point in history, speaking wise, that you could say that there was a difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism because of the lack of a state. But I think that Israel's coming to fruition in 1948 as the modern state of Israel. All the historical tropes that existed from medieval anti-Semitism all the way to and attributed to Jews have been basically parachuted onto the state of Israel, Israelis and Jews at large. And so that is the current environment as far as the root cause of the problem itself. Now, when you take that understanding and try to contextualize it within the U.S. American context, I think it's important to obviously understand, and again, we're talking about academic freedom. There is on American college campuses, one is entitled, based on the look at free speech, to hold views that are anti-Semitic views, as far as one's free speech parameters. That being said, the danger and the concern that that I think that has been viewed and looked at throughout all these years is when one disseminates anti-Semitism, and the dissemination is actually where the violation and abuse of these issues actually take place. And so when you're talking about and to that end, every individual who is part of the university architecture and is there to be receiving a steady dose of this narrative is on the receiving end of this steady anti-Semitism. And then there's a question about whether, and the debate, and really the only debate I would argue historically, being in this rodeo for all the years that I've been in, the quote unquote healthy debate that has existed up until 10/7 is that those who see themselves as anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, are really only legitimate critique, only legitimate, legitimate criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu or any Israeli government, but they are not anti-Semites because the connotation, and this is really also part of the lack of definition when it comes to anti-Semitism, which to my mind is attempted to be alleviated through the IRA definition, is that anti-Semitism is Jewish racism. And so the fact that there is codified, indoctrinated, concretized concretized racism, structural racism within the academy that has the facade of anti-Zionism, saying that I'm just a critic, is part of what you've seen evolve here within the historical context. And really, if you look at the reality that has shaped on American college campuses, that has been the ability to indoctrinate individuals. And this is worth, a few words to understand the historical understanding of how this came about, which is part of, and this is just a kind of a tidbit or a promo. I have a forthcoming book on the reality that's an edited volume that'll be published hopefully in the next coming year post 10/7. That also there's a chapter that I've devoted time to as far as the political economics of anti-Semitism at large and how they have basically allowed for anti-Semitism to thrive on American college campuses. So there has been I would argue, since the 1960s, a steady but sure dumping, on the one hand, but also, or if you want to call it, investments of Middle Eastern money into the American university, for the sole reason of really the fact that going back to the early days of the PLO in the 1960s, there was an understanding that maybe they won't be able to defeat Israel militarily speaking, but they will be able to win the hearts and minds of all those who support the Palestinian narrative, i.e. the Palestinian cause, through what is we call in the social sciences the idea of the use of soft power. So what has happened as a result of all of that, there has been steady investment, in particular in the area of Middle East studies, that universities have allowed themselves and lended themselves into buying the politics and buying departments and buying chairs that have allowed them to buy the politics in which these topics are being taught. Case in point, a lesser known fact, one of the first places that was bought was the King Fahad Center at the University of Arkansas, a unknown place to anybody who cared about what was following. And that became a model for basically other departments and other areas to buy into investing into these very areas. And so you've seen a slow but steady support of foundations and countries that have allowed this reality to metastasize and the toxicity that has allowed this to happen within the American Academy. It's also important to note that this is also the beginning, and this is, again, I find this as an historian extremely important to understand the reality of why the layering here took place, because this is really the foundation building that has been furthering this so-called debate on the Arab-Israeli conflict on American college campuses regarding this debate of what is free speech and what is considered to be scholarly work. The fact that the individuals who've been able to basically insert this narrative has been predominantly scholar activists since the 1960s, where they have taught based on this very, nefarious narrative, shifting the idea that Jews are no longer have a right to exist. They are part of this cosmic evil. And shifting the David and Goliath metaphor to basically argue that Jews are no longer have room in this debate. And the only real David in this whole narrative are actually the Palestinians themselves. And what's important to note within this, and this has become a really the layering of the academy, in particular in the humanities, that allowed this to become the cause celeb of every possible issue in the world in the humanities. 20 years ago, I would argue that maybe this was only limited to the humanities. It is no longer the case. Now you actually have it also within the STEM area. So really, it's hijacked the entire academy as a cause celeb. And this is really also the backdrop of the understanding of the growth of what is known as the boycott movement, the BDS movement that operated, that started operating in North America really a little bit after the Second Intifada in 2000, took a huge turn after the Durban conference, where you had in Durban, South Africa, massive of statements and slogans of Zionism as racism and Israel as an ethnic cleanser. All of that is related. And for those of you lawyers in the room, it's no coincidence that we are talking about South Africa and the fact that South Africa is the one that supported the ICJ as far as the International Court of Justice and pushing the idea of genocide. All of these ingredients were laid out properly with the idea of using international law and so-called international law in order to create this very fallacious narrative as it relates to Israel. At the same time, in tandem, which is also critically important to understand within this political economics of the growth of this anti-Semitism that has thrived and metastasized within our institutions, and it's important to note that, the university system in general, I would argue, operates kind of like the academic industrial complex. Universities do not like to say no to monies. And unless you can actually prove that there are direct ties to terrorism, they don't turn money down. And so, which is all of this has allowed many of these countries, especially Middle East countries, to pour in millions and millions of dollars into these universities with the idea of solidifying the correct narrative that they would like it to happen. After 9/11, which is a critical turning point that took place within American society, up until 9/11, one could go after what was considered to be state-sponsored terrorism, meaning you go after the countries that were involved in terror groups. After 9/11, there was a realization that actually not only are the state-sponsored countries who are sponsoring anti-Semitism the one that are complicit with promoting terrorism within American and Western society, but also charities are involved within that very dynamic. To that end, I hail from Philadelphia. One of the things that we are less known for, besides our love for the Philadelphia Eagles, in our recent win with the Super Bowl, is the fact that one of the first meetings that was a Hamas meeting took place here in Philadelphia back in 1993. And the minutes of those meetings that were disclosed later on in several court cases in Washington, and later on in the case known as the Hoyland Foundation case, revealed really part of the architecture that allowed the Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwan, to create its diaspora operation, this kind of foreign affairs arm in North America. It's important to note, from the historical standpoint, that Hamas started operating, established, it's a base of operation back in 87, 88 under Sheikh Yassin. And by 1993, they're already here in Philly, in my backyard in South Philly, having meetings talking about what is known within the Muslim narrative as zakat, or tzedakah, the idea of the fact that if you cannot help yourself, the resistance, i.e., the larger cause, you can, of course, write a check. And to make that happen, these are the kind of efforts that you can make, that you can do to help the narrative grow. At the same time, in tandem, you did start seeing here, and this is also important to understand historically speaking, individuals like Yasser Arafat and the founders of the PLO actually started their activism also on Arab universities, in particular in Cairo, and they took that modality into American campuses. A group that predates what I'm sure many of you have heard before, a group known as the SJP, Student for Justice in Palestine, which is the #1 propaganda arm that promotes Palestinian activism and Palestinian propaganda. There was a group in the that started early on in the 60s and later on to the 80s and grew. A group known as GUPS, the General Union for Palestine Students. No surprise, many of those organizations started in Berkeley. So again, no surprise as far as what we've seen coming out of Berkeley over the past few years. And that led to the growth of organizations like the SJP, Student for Justice in Palestine. And those groups not only hijacked the student body, but many of the founders of GUPS and later on, the precursor to SJP, are now tenured professors and advisors and whatnot, but have also impacted the faculty. So when you're talking about the architecture of the American university, you have it today, and really in the cacophony that we saw, after 10/7, you have a top-down and a bottom-up movement where you have fertile ground for selling this very narrative as a result of pushing the Hamas narrative that has been sanitized, I would argue, for years under American college campuses that allow this to grow and thrive. So now, not only do you have Students for Justice in Palestine, you have also what is known as FSJP, Faculty Justice in Palestine, who are also these very faculty activists that have been using this very narrative within the American college campus. That being said, and this also goes back to another point that is critical to understand how this has been layered and sanctioned. Many of the founders of the PLO also were inspired by the Weather Underground movement, by what was happening by groups like Che Guevara, the Black Panthers, and others. And so that kind of resistance narrative and the idea that the PLO saw itself as a kindred spirit with these individuals on American college campuses as fertile ground to a lot of this Again, no coincidence if you talk about historically speaking that Fatah and the PLO come together back in 1968, they unite. They also look at what was happening here in American college campuses, particularly in Chicago in 1968. They also see that as a perfect modality of resistance at its best. There's also an adaptation of the race narrative. So when it comes to racial relations and the debate about race in America, this is also something that was kindly, and really adopted by Palestinian sympathizers and Palestinians themselves, and have also led to really, if you follow historically speaking, what has led to the reality of the debate about, within the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic today, to the debate about race in America, whereas it was simplified within the Israeli-Palestinian architecture. That is to say that Jews are whites, Palestinians are black, and Jews are and Zionists are racist. They are so racist that they import their racism outside of Israel and they send them on to American and Western college campuses. This was actually a program, parenthetically worthy of note, known as what the SJP groups known as called the Deadly Exchange. All groups, including ADL, the AJC, and other kind of groups in North America, who were sponsoring exchanges of military and police training with the Israeli army, and then in general, collaboration between Israel and the United States when it comes to military issues. That was seen as a racist action at large. So that is a critical point to understand, because if Jews themselves are perceived to be as racist based on that narrative, then of course they can't themselves, or based on this kind of simplistic narrative, be accused of propagating racism. And so the argument, when it comes to anti-Semitism, when it comes to American college campuses within this cosmic evil, is that every time Jewish individuals, students and faculty alike, raise the topic of anti-Semites, then that has been shut down by saying, no, 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 you're just, pinkwashing, because the kind of the way in which it is perceived that Israel is treating Gazans today, Palestinians in general, is worse than any possible thing that Jews can say that they are not that they themselves are that they are experiencing racism and anti-Semitism. Further, this is all part of this cosmic evil that Lewis spoke about, but I would also take it one step further as it relates to the how much the Holocaust has been seeped into the reality, is the fact what is considered to be Holocaust inversion into the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic, by arguing, of course, that everything that the state of Israel does is within the framework of a modern day Holocaust. So as such, ergo, every Israeli leader has been depicted as a Nazi. Gaza itself, the terminology today is an open air prison, refugee camps or concentration camps, all, everything along those lines is part of the narrative. So this is the historical understanding of this very reality that leads to this massive cacophony of voices that when you get to 10-7, not only are people not embarrassed to walk around draped with terrorist flags and terrorism symbols, a la Hamas and Hezbollah and ISIS, there is and in contrast to 9/11, you didn't see this on college campuses. You see this pride and zeal of walking around, of adopting terrorism. You had professors who, were going around saying that they were exhilarated. They were empowered. This is resistance at its best. And again, a whole other lecture that is worthy of note. We don't have time today to talk about is the fact of the shift in the framing of this debate. That if Israel, and this is part of the common framings of the debate about the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic, is a settler colonial white project and Jews are colonialists, this is decolonialism. And so the fact that, and so that's why it was justified. And so when you take all of that into the understanding, when you try to explain this to university administrators and you try to look at the reality itself, there have been many challenges that we have faced and really looked at over the past few years. In particular, it is worthy of note just to kind of put a point about that part of the normalizing of anti-Semitism that I define within American society that has been used and abused by the academy and journalism and other places. Also, the codification of what has been known as diversity, equity, and inclusion, these offices of DEI within universities. What we have found and documented over the past few years that many of those administrators of DEI and DEI offices have been able to themselves parachute their own perception of what they perceive to be as anti-Semitism and racism. And racism in America is only one thing. And they were the ones who were defining and looking at whether or not anti-Semitism is actually racism. And so their own biases clouded the reality. I'm sure many of you might remember what took place at Stanford with the former judge and the former DEI officer at Stanford and the ongoing case where this was a YouTube that went on, could not stop herself from her own political viewpoints regarding DEI and going after the judge in his debate. This is all part of the symptoms of this larger problem. So part of what we've seen, and I think that this is part of the challenge that we're facing today and has been going on for the past few decades now, and this is also leads into the debate about the IRA definition, the adaptation of whether or not the IRA definition should, to my mind, just to be clear, be adopted by the gold standard of what anti-Semitism is, because IRA, worthwhile looking into the entire all the categories of what IRA looks at. But what's important, for our purposes, is the fact that it includes forms of anti-Zionism and anti-Israelism as anti-Semitic. It's an expansion, by the way, of Natan Sharansky's 3Ds when it comes to defining anti-Semitism on American college campuses. But the universities have balked at this idea because their response was, no, this interferes and denigrates with free speech. To my mind, and this is, I think, goes back to, the environment we are in here today. Since 10/7, if it was not clear up until then, to my mind, 10/7 has made it very clear that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are indeed synonymous. This healthy debate, or so-called healthy debate, that has been going on, within the American discourse, was thrown out the door. That being said, the opposition, led by all these groups, sponsored by the political economy of anti-Semitism here through SJP, AMP, you've seen individuals like communist groups, people like Fergie Chambers, groups like Code Pink, groups like who Occupy Wall Street, all of those individuals who were involved in the encampments on college campuses were actively supporting terrorism. Hamas is still listed as a terrorist organization on the State Department list and defined as a terror group. But what you had here is an adaptation of terrorism on American college campuses, which is what you're seeing today. So these are all the many problems. What can be done about this and what needs to be done about it? I know Richard is looking at me. We can talk a lot about, the endless problems that we have to deal with, but I did feel it was critical to kind of explain the history of how we got here and that, and to that end, it should be no surprise to anybody that none of this came in a vacuum. This was a layered plan, or what is considered to be in communism and Marxism, playing the long game here, and this is the long road of hijacking American academy and American culture. The latest event, as far as, as it relates to current events, of course, is President Trump's newly executive order when it comes to cracking down on anti-Semitism. I think that is a useful tool for constituents of the academy. That being said, it's important to contextualize that too. It's still quite amorphous how it's going to be enforced. Nobody knows exactly how this is going to play out in the reinforcement. The Title VI of 1964, as it relates to defining Jews as minorities on campus and as it relates to discrimination, only applies to students, does not deal with faculty. So when it comes to what I deal with in my wheelhouse, when it comes to how faculty have been discriminated, and abused within their own institutions, and by the way, there have been, a great deal of lawsuits in that regard as well. Also falls today within HR problems as far as a hostile environment to work in. There's a bunch of lawsuits going on in particular places like Columbia and at Berkeley and other places as far as the discrimination for toxic environment. You've also seen some of these examples at places like CUNY as it related to discrimination against union members when it comes to their Jewishness. So lawfare is extremely helpful here now. I do think that there are simple fixes that we can do, and something that I've been writing about for a few years now that I think are useful tools that need to be implemented, in particular now post 10.7 in the post 10.7 world, and is what can happen now within the architecture of the new Trump executive order. I have discussed the concept of deporting and defunding, the idea of looking at the admissions process within, who comes into universities on the student level when it comes to their backgrounds, where their money is coming from, and are they really are they good standing individuals within the university structure that deserve student visas? That's one aspect. The other aspect, when it comes to foreign money that is being poured into universities, are there violations when it comes to FARA as far as universities receiving foreign aid? And in general, also, many of these groups on college campuses that themselves are not 501c3s, but have fiscal, trustees by different foundations that have been supporting BDS and anti-Semitism on college campuses, foundations that you may have heard of, groups like Westpacs and the Tide Foundation and other organizations that have been lending their charitable status to some of these groups, are also worthy of looking into as far as university campus. And then there's a question about faculty. Some of these faculty who have become these faculty advocates Some of them should, to my mind, go on, be put on mothballs or reserve ship as far as looking at to how they are teaching and abusing the podium. What is considered to be legitimate actual discourse on college campuses as well, is worthy of note. But there needs to be a serious deep dive into some of these issues. As a result of 10-7, you have seen that some of the universities, in particular, there was a court case that happened, and I'm sure many of you have heard about what happened at Harvard. Harvard settled as far as, their adaptation of changing Harvard, adopting some elements of the IRA definition and trying to change the narrative. Not everybody's happy with the result there. Their other universities are all dealing with some of these aspects all around. Again, there is no, unfortunately, magic bullets here. But I think that there has been, for sure, spotlighted since the hearing on Capitol Hill that were led by Elise Stefanik at the time, as far as looking to see the stupidity and ignorance of university presidents as it relates to their inability to look at what anti-Semitism is. To my mind, it doesn't depend, on the context, the famous quote that was laid out there. But these are things that need to be clearly defined and clearly enforced on the campuses. And so this has to do with, again, all the stakeholders when it comes to, as I said, the constituents on the campuses, outside stakeholders when it comes to donors, and when it comes to looking at the processes of hiring and firing when it comes to universities, and also starting with the admissions process that needs to be looked at very carefully. If we don't do that, we are going to go into, going to dig ourselves deeper and deeper into a rabbit hole here in this abyss of this normalizing of anti-Semitism. The university, to my mind, and the American liberal university should be a place of an exchange and a discourse of ideas. And there has been a slow but sure degradation of the academy at large as a result of allowing really structural racism to come into the American university campus. I talk for a living. I know I've spoken a lot here, and I threw out a lot of ideas. But let me stop here, Richard, and let me, I know people are asking questions, so let's take it from here, and I'm happy to tackle whatever we have in the time that we have.
Terrific. So thank you, Asaf. You really have covered the waterfront for us. I think for me, the key question, after your very apt description of where we are today, is I hate to invoke Lenin, but maybe it's appropriate given the nature of the campuses these days. But the question is, what is to be done? So I think that last piece is very instructive as we think about it. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, some of which have been coming in from our listeners. And by the way, everybody, please feel free to ask questions either in the Q&A. We're checking the chat as well. So please let us know if you have questions. But I first want to, first let me mention, I did leave out one sponsoring organization of this event, which is the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington. We don't want to leave them out by any means, so let me just mention that as well. I don't think we've heard a description of SPME in terms of your organization, who its members are, what its mission is. Could you very briefly just tell us a little bit about the organization of which you are executive director?
Sure. Good question. Sorry, I didn't mention that. I didn't want to, figure that, talk about myself, but talk about the issues. But yes, SPME has been around for the past 23 years. SPME's bread and butter is faculty. The raison d'etre of the organization was created to mobilize faculty, left, right, and center for that matter, to combat anti-Semitism and BDS. The only one of the few common denominators linked to SPME is that Israel's right to exist. I would be remiss to mention that SPME is an outgrowth of a group that existed in the 1980s, a group known as APME. And I take no responsibility of these acronyms. I did not make them up, which was known as the American Association of Universities Professors for Peace. And that was a group that had a similar agenda back in the 80s. People like Bernard Lewis and others were involved in that group back then, who already saw the trajectory of some of these problems. The growth of the BDS movement, as I mentioned in my earlier part of my remarks, was motivation because universities, and our membership were targets of these calls for boycotts, that were tried to be sold as not against the individuals, but against the institutions, and all these kind of clever ways of trying to square the circle as far as what they meant by boycotting individuals. So we are close to over 40,000 members strong around the world. The gist of our work is North America. SPME is multidisciplinary as far as trying to help faculty deal with this hostile, with all the some of these problems that I described, today, and help them, and not to mention help younger faculty that are going through the tenure process to stay in the academy and to be able to have an environment where they can live in and do the work that they would like to, that they need to do, and were tasked to do within their institutions. That's one part of the group. The other part of the that I head is the Association of Middle East Studies in Africa, which is an academic association that was created by, again, by Bernard Lewis and Fuad Ajami, with the idea of creating balance within, in particular, Middle East studies in Africa, in particular, given the fact that the MESA, which is the Middle East Studies Association of America, now has openly voted on BDS. We actually engage in scholarship and discourse, and not in advocacy like many of these groups do. And that's, also part of to the earlier point about my remarks, that all of this is a feature of where propaganda has replaced scholarship on a great majority of American college campuses.
So let me, turning from that then, and to the extent I'm asking questions that call for legal conclusions, you're free to demur from responding. But I do think it's, as we talk about, for instance, this builds on the question somebody has asked, that we think about the support of academics for boycotts of Israel and for Jewish academics, Israelis who have been disinvited to lecture. So the question I have is, to what extent are we asking for equal footing? And to what extent are we saying there are some concepts that are being advanced, even in the name of academic freedom or freedom of speech, that ought not to be countenanced on campuses? Well, how do you see that? Is it more about equal treatment, or is it about protecting Jewish students and faculty from hostile environments in which things are said that wouldn't be countenanced in the context of other minority groups?
Well, it's a good question, and I think it's partially both, because what you have is, ironically speaking, American Jews and Catholics are the two largest group in American society that have invested the most amount of capital in the academy, and it is those constituents that have been turned on as a result of the current environment. It's no surprise, apropos after 10/7, that you had a call from Catholic universities to the Jewish community, come to us because we're safer. So the rejectionism on American college campuses of anything that smacks of anything that is deemed conservative, including religion, has been kind of canceled as a result of this kind of growth of cancel culture within the American architecture. I think that we, the collective we, the Jewish community, and again, it's not monolithic, as we all know. There are also part of the problem, I'll put that out there, is of course that there is a healthy fifth column in the Jewish community. When I have debates on American college, when I have debates on campuses, it is not unheard of that somebody will start up a debate by saying, "I'm Jewish, but," or "I was circumcised at a bar mitzvah," whatever token they need to show their Jewishness, but why they support the opposition. I think that what has happened as a result of this degradation that I'm describing is that you're being shut down. I mean, the fact that and this is something I actually wrote about after 9/11. The fact that to get out a pro-American, pro-Israel sentiment, we have to come in with security forces or what the costs that are involving to come and bring another voice to a campus, which all it's trying to do is to actually have a fair exchange of ideas, is ludicrous. And today, today it's much worse. I mean, today, if an opinion is not part of the orthodoxy of the day, basically it's being shut down. And people are, not allowed to come, so I think that's part of it. I think, the idea of trying to create once again a baseline of what is legitimate exchanges of ideas and discourse and scholarship, apropos what we do at ASMIA and SPME. I mean, we have an academic conference every year in Washington, and people present papers from all sorts of walks of life. And as long as the paper is a solid scholarly paper, nobody's being shut down because of who they are. The opposition tends to do that. And so I think that they're sticking to what the academy should be like, and having an even footing, on an equal playing field that needs to play out here. That being said, I think that there is a also a move, and you're seeing this as a result of some of the actions that are happening on campus. People are being pushed out. People are leaving. There's a concern about how toxic the environment is, and I think that that's another feature of this problem.
Well, let me ask you about, we've been talking about what's going on in the universities. There's been a settlement by Harvard University in which they have, in effect, agreed to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, determining whether students are confronting anti-Semitism. And there's been a huge hullabaloo, I suppose, to be expected in the pages of the Harvard Crimson and elsewhere, of people saying, "Oh, now you're shutting us down. You're not allowing us to speak." Now, the irony of the fact that many of the people who are saying that have themselves been shutting down Jews and pro-Israel people for years now. Is there anything to what they say? In your perspective, what has to be done to allow those voices to continue to be heard, even as steps are being taken to protect Jews and other pro-Israel folk from themselves being isolated and marginalized?
Again, I think that the university needs to provide parameters for these exchange for these to allow this to happen, and not to feel that people are being indoctrinated, discriminated within under the guise of the university. I mean, I think that this is not a sustainable environment. I mean, let's also put it into blatant financial terms. I mean, if you're paying an Ivy League school $90,000 a year, and you come and you're going to a university, which is analogous to a madrasa in Tehran or somewhere else. I mean, where's your money going? I mean, one needs to contextualize that as well. I mean, parenthetically, so the case that happened, not at Harvard, but the case that happened at Columbia. So Avi Shilon is one of our members. He was the individual who had the what he described as what he thought were Nukba terrorists who entered his classroom at Columbia University, and he now has two NYPD cops, in front of his classroom to allow him to teach a class on Zionism. I mean, it's ludicrous, about the measures of security that one needs to do. So, I mean, I think it behooves, I mean, the number one job of the university, when you have parents and grandparents sending their kids to campus, is to protect their basic safety. If they can't maintain that, and this is not, the anti-Semitism that we've seen is no longer limited to verbal. I mean, this is physical. People have gotten, there's been physical anti-Semitism beyond all of that. And so, what is the university doing to allow that to happen, while at the same time allowing for to maintain their job, their utility? I mean, the job is, the fact that what you saw during the encampments of students, Marxist students who were going around and basically demanding at the same time resistance, but demanding that they get their gluten-free food and Uber Eats and whatnot. A little bit of a disconnect there itself, but hijacking of buildings and taking over, cafeteria workers and taking them hostage and things like that. I mean, this is not acceptable. So the university needs to stop all of this. And I think that if they can't, I mean, it cannot be what we saw at UCLA happen, for example, where you had, students attacking faculty and, preventing them from coming to enter campus. What you're seeing now with Shai Davidai at Columbia, who is in place of employment, but he can't step into his place of employment because, I mean, these are the things that need to shift and change yesterday.
Let's shift for a moment to go back to a subject actually you raised in your initial remarks, which is the issue of the funding of universities and by Arab countries. What do you know about strings that have been attached to these donations? To what extent are universities resisting? Complying with the demands of the folks that are providing those funds, perhaps they're not doing so at all, but any light you can shed on that would be appreciated. And I wonder if you're aware of something that's been introduced in Congress called the Deterrent Act, which is intended to provide greater sunlight in terms of reporting of funds that are being received by universities and lowering the threshold at which they have to report and make those disclosures. So any light you can shed on what's going on, and if you have perspective on what that potential action by Congress and other actions that might be taken in response to those funds coming in.
Sure. Look, I think that there's a beginning of an understanding of, where these monies are coming from. As I said, universities do not like to say no to money. And as far as, related to the Deterrent Act, this is where the investigation of universities as it relates to shedding some sunlight, whether or not there are any kind of FARA violations. So, Qatar and other countries who are buying chairs in departments and buying the politics of these departments. It's also important to note that some of these exchanges that we've discovered also relates to the fact that when you have some of these university campuses who have campuses in the region, so Georgetown has a campus in Qatar and other places like that, in Dubai and other places. And so when you have those kind of campuses, that's allowing also the free flow of monies to come in. There has to be really, there has to be a clear transparency as far as these monies, and basically see it whether or not they're violating, 501c3s, FARA issues. And they have to disclose all of that. And I think the bigger danger, to my mind, as it relates to all of this, is that the American university is no longer American. because you've had all this foreign money that is being poured into the institution. And if you look at the makeup of the student body, for example, so for example, today, the student body at Columbia, 58% of its current student body is foreign. And so there's a question about, the functionality about, and this money, by the way, is not only limited to the Middle East. I'm also talking about Chinese and Russian money that we've observed over the years that is also going in to buy influence and buy power. And these are part of these monies that are coming in. And so while Jewish donors have positively taken away their monies, as a result of all of that, what has happened since 10/7, universities have large endowments. And the question is really, how much is it impacting? I mean, when you have, a place like Harvard that has an endowment of a small European country, but still took PPE money during COVID and because it couldn't pay its cafeteria workers, I kind of question exactly their use of monies.
Um, I also want to ask this also a question that has come in from one of our participants. He asks, on October 7, 2023, there were academics and physicians who openly declared their support for Hamas's actions and declared their intention to mistreat Jewish students and patients. Are you aware of circumstances in which there was an avowed intention to mistreat Jewish students? And the question is also asked when it's pointed out that this is happening, do you face claims sometimes that pointing out mistreatment of Jewish students has been painted as Islamophobic, and how do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, your last point, every time the word anti-Semitism is mentioned, the immediate reaction, and Islamophobia. Let me be clear. To my mind, from my vantage point, we have seen unprecedented amount over the past decade or so of soars of anti-Semitism, 50 and 60% every year, according even to stats of the Anti-Defamation League. So I mean, the discrimination is not taking place against other groups, but against Jews. What you've seen now in the medical field, and I'm sure some of you have seen this of late, what happened with the two nurses in Australia. About this was also happening at the beginning of 10/7, where you had in the medical schools, in particular in New York at Langoon, where you had nurses who made those very comments, don't send Jews to me, nursing students, otherwise we're going to stab them, and things of the sort. And so again, positively, nothing here is positive. The silver lining has been, as far as corporate America. So some of these activists and these propagandists on the campuses who were actually law students and medical students, especially those who were law students. And there's a reason why they go into law, because from there they go and become congressional aides. And there's a whole kind of, they follow a very clear blueprint of activism, and also affect policy in that regard. They have lost offers from law firms. Saying that you don't no longer qualify, you're not up to snuff, and we're not going to hire you. So corporate America is also looking at these very institutions to see, are these institutions, and apropos your earlier question about this before, Richard, are they actually producing the kind of quality of what they're supposed to be doing? So if they're losing ranking, and if they're losing, the skill set, and even though you have the imprimatur of Harvard Law is not what it used to be, or Stanford Law, or anywhere else, when you're producing the kind of quality of individuals who don't know their craft. And so there's been a lot. So corporate America is rescinding offers. And I think that obviously that is hurting them when it comes to where they're going to go forward. I think that's some kind of positive movement in that regard. But you are seeing more and more, and I mentioned this in my remarks about the faculty group at Columbia, which is comprised now of over 200 faculty members who are trying to change the environment on Columbia's campus as a result of what has been happening at Columbia, many of them in the medical school. who are denying the reality of what happened on 10/7, denying the rape, denying the maiming, denying the atrocities. We're here today on the day where the Bivas family is returning. I mean, there is a constant denial of 10/7 in face of this activism. And that's extremely problematic. But I think that positively, I think that some of these individuals, there are consequences. But again, this also goes back to, what you were commenting about Harvard, that there has to be enforcement of these issues. And that part has not clear yet how that's going to be done. And that's done on an institution, going from institution to institution.
So those questions have been coming in now, and unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get to all of them, but I do want to, first of all, turn to a question from a gentleman whose name I think you'll know, Carrie Nelson. And the question is about the battle over how to define and apply academic freedom. And this, I think, goes to one of the issues that's sort of implicit in what you were just talking about now, where you have an argument what academic freedom means and what it protects, with some people saying that, academic freedom properly understood has to do with a scholar working in his or her area of expertise, versus just mouthing off on issues that they have no particular knowledge about it. And yet others who think that should entitle an academic in the classroom to say things that are derogatory about Israel and implicitly about Jewish students. What are the dimensions? How should we be understanding academic freedom as these fights are taking place? And how can academic freedom be a constructive tool to allow that there is, in fact, fair and open discourse in the academy on a whole range of issues, versus allowing the academy being allowed to become a tool for propaganda, which really is not about basic scholarship at all. So please make of that what you will.
Sure. So first of all, I mean, a plug for Carrie. I mean, Carrie has been a great fighter in this very debate, and everything that Carrie writes, I highly recommend to everybody in the group. He has written a great deal on this very topic, as someone who knows intimately the ins and outs of the AAUP, the American Association of University Professors. The AUP is now basically, is basically, to put it bluntly, has now allowed for support for BDS within their narrative, within the AAUP. This is all part of the politicization and the history of the AUP as an organization, where the original founding fathers, in individuals like John Dewey and others, was about not politicizing the podium. And I think that this kind of the coercive impact of this anti-Semitic faculty and anti-Zionist that have basically infiltrated every aspect and every expenditure of the academy, making it this kind of their cause celeb, has been part of this very hijacking that Carrie, and all of us have been advocating against, because of how they've allowed themselves to put aside any measure and any metrics of scholarship in face of propaganda. And I think that these very institutions, I mean, I think that there has to be a clear line, and as part of these academic associations and others, of what falls within the realm of legitimate discourse and what is out. I mean, what's out the door? I mean, to my mind, if you support racism, i.e., anti-Semitism, then you're beyond the pale here. But they give this facade of discourse which is non-existent, and I think that the part that needs to be very clear, and this is all part of these very clear standard that needs to be established, are what are the university's red lines. They have not established those red lines, and this is, again, to the basic level of if universities were to adopt the IRA definition. And there were clear red lines, there were clear consequences, not to mention correlated with the fact when you have states, where there are enforced BDS, anti-BDS legislation, and you have a state institution that is violating and while at the same time receiving funds from the state, those are clear red lines. There has to be clear red lines here. But the wishy-washy situation that we're in has allowed this to be interpreted in many ways. And I think that, again, what 10.7 has done in many ways has spotlighted the the egregious behavior of all of this all around. And I think the fact that there has to be clear understanding that this is terrorism. This is not a matter of free speech. And so that needs to stop. But I'm with Carrie on the challenge. I mean, this is not a very challenging aspect, and the fact that many of our academic colleagues still see the groups like the AAUP and others as the gold standard of debate on free speech, which are really, at the same time, they are allowing for defending terrorism. That all needs to stop, and that's going to take time.
Right. Well, there's much more we could say. You could say, I'm sure, about these topics, but I think we're at the witching hour. I don't know if you'd mind me forwarding to you some of the other questions that came in for response at another time. But I want to thank you, Asaf Romirowsky, on behalf of AAJLJ, the JCRC of Greater Washington, the American Jewish Committee, the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington, and SEDEC DC, for spending time with us today. And I think in some ways this was better than getting a lawyer in place to really unpack for us a lot of the history and background for this, as well as responding to the question of what is to be done. And I'm sure we'll have opportunity to get a lawyer in that seat as well, to give us perhaps a drier presentation, but one of interest to us as well as lawyers. So thanks again. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to having you join us again. In person or on Zoom, as the case may be, at one of our brown bag lunches. Thank you, everyone.
I appreciate the hospitality. Take care.